Yeah, it's a small town.
Good afternoon. I'm Claire Kelm of the League of Women Voters, San Juan Islands. Diane is unable to be here today. She is ill. Our league is celebrating our 20th anniversary and we're happy to have you with us. How many people here have not yet had a chance to join the league? Well, if that's the case, membership information is available at the back of the room. And also at the back of the room, Steve Bowman has just updated the They Represent You Try bulletin, which lists all of our elected officials and their contact information. And there are some of those back there on the back as well. The League of Women Voters does not endorse candidates or political parties, but does encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, influence public policy through education and advocacy, and do take stands on issues after study and consensus. You are all welcome to attend our next board meeting here on May 4th at noon. Our annual meeting is on Monday, May 11th at the Grange. It is a potluck where you bring a potluck dish and your own plate, glass, and utensils. The League of Women Voters San Juans will provide napkins and beverages. Reservations are not required and there is no fee. We would, however, like to know if you are attending so we know how many to expect. Please use this as an opportunity to bring a guest who might be interested in league issues. Our speaker will be Judy Chauvin, addressing the changes and challenges of Cuba from her first-hand experiences. Please join us. The notice will be going out via email shortly. And you'll probably see these brochures posted around town, and this is the one that will arrive in your email. Also in June, the State League of Women Voters is having its convention in Yakima, June 12th through 14th, and we have 2 more delegate slots to fill. So members, anybody interested should contact me or Diane about attending. I'm now going to turn the meeting over to Nisha Quast, who will introduce this very special program today.
Hello, and thank you for coming today. Our program today was entitled The Darker Side of Paradise, Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault in San Juan County. We live in a beautiful place, and nobody likes to think sometimes that we have the same problems that the rest of the world does, but we do, and this is a serious one. And I'd like to thank the speakers who've come today to talk to us on the subject. We have Kim Bryan, who's the Executive Director of the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services in San Juan. She's been the director since August 2014, and before that she was the Assistant Director. She's also been the Director of a shelter in Spokane and worked in domestic violence and sexual assault in Eugene, Oregon. Our second speaker is Sheriff Ron Krebs, who was elected last fall and previously was a deputy for 8 years and also served as an EMT. And our final speaker is Sandra Burt, who is the victim advocate for domestic violence and sexual assault cases with the prosecutor's office in the county. She has a master's in social work and is a licensed social worker and also works as a psychotherapist. And I'll each speaker speak up to 20 minutes, giving their views on the subject, and then we'll have question and answer afterwards. And Kim, please start.
Thank you. Thanks for asking us here on a very important subject. One that it is interesting to hear from our community members. Do we really have this issue in our islands? You know, is this really as bad as it seems? You really need 3 offices in the San Juan Islands because we do have one on each of the larger islands. And unfortunately, yes, it is. The statistics do parallel the statistics of the mainland, with 1 in 3 homes experiencing some form of abuse. And that can be on the continuum. As we know, domestic violence and any form of abuse is on a continuum. It will start with the lack of respect and, you know, the basic issues, and then go all the way to violence and eventually death if it's not stopped. So when folks ask me about the issue of the continuum, is it really abuse if it's just verbal, or if it's just emotional, or if it's just, you know, taunting, those type of things. And I like to say, yeah, if it's not something that you would want, how you would treat your mother, or you would want your mother treated by somebody else, or your daughter treated by somebody else, then it's not okay, is it? DVSAS, Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services, has been in existence for 22 years in the islands. Started out as volunteer agency here on this island, and they joined actually with another volunteer agency from Orcas Island and created the agency that now exists today. We are a standalone private nonprofit. We are not affiliated with the county in any way, other than that obviously we do work closely with the services that the county offers, but we are not a county agency, we are a private nonprofit. We are funded by state grants, and they are all just grants. We have to do the work to ask for them and jump through all of their hoops to be able to continue to get them. We are also funded by a lot of generous private foundations and grants, and more private parties just wanting to donate and join our team of working against this issue in the islands. We have, like I said, 3 offices, one on each island, and we are staffed Monday through Thursday, and then of course we are available for services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have toll-free crisis lines on each of the islands, and each island has their own number because we know how island specific we all are. An Orcas person wouldn't want to call a Lopez number and vice versa, so we have island specific numbers. And we have trained advocates that are available 24 hours a day. And that is for domestic violence and sexual assault. We do accompany assault victims to hospitals, for exams, or we will meet them at a safe place to be a one-on-one advocate for them. The services that we provide, besides the 24-hour crisis line, is one-on-one advocacy. We do advocacy counseling, systems advocacy. Can you imagine if you were victimized? First of all, you're in a state of trauma, and you don't know if you could even leave, and if you could, where would you go? And if you had children, what would you do? And where would you live? And if you were depending on the abuser for your support, all these barriers just start stacking up against you. So having an advocate there to say, yeah, there is hope. There is a way to reestablish yourself, to find safety, and to start your life over if that's what you choose to do. We don't force, we don't tell her what she should do. We allow her to build her own plan. And I say her because, as we know, 85% or more of the victims are women. There are some male victims, and we do work with male victims. It's rare, but we do. So the advocate works with the victim, helps them make their own plan to escape the violence, or if they choose for whatever reason to stay within the situation, then we work with them to build a safety plan of how they can make sure that they are safe, or that they and their children are safe in a violent situation. Things as simple as, in an explosive situation, don't be in a room where there might be weapons. And you think, well, what if they don't have any weapons in the house? Well, in a kitchen there's knives. In a garage there's tire irons. I mean, there's things that have been used against us that we don't even think of as weapons until an explosive situation happens. So the safety plan goes all the way from something as basic as that, as to having important documents and copies of birth certificates and insurance and things like that. Let's take copies and let's put them somewhere safe. So if you have to get out and hurry and you can't get back in a safe way to get these documents, they're not going to be shredded, because that's a big thing that the perpetrator likes to do. Is let's shred everything, let me get my hands on whatever I can and make it even harder for her to try to reestablish herself away from me. Isolation is a big part of domestic violence. So if he can get her to the point where she's feeling like there's nobody out there I can talk to, there's nobody out there that cares, then he's got her, right? Having her totally dependent on him is a way for him to then maintain that control, because we know what the definition of domestic violence is the pattern of power and control in a relationship. So he is going to establish that power and control by making her completely dependent on him in many various ways. In isolation, in controlling how she uses her car, to the point where he'll check her odometer. Do you have anybody checking your odometer when you left today? And they know how many miles it is to get to the library, and if you go anywhere else before you come back, you're going to be in big trouble. Do you have somebody checking your debit card records? How much did you spend at the grocery store? Let me see your receipt. Why'd you buy that? I didn't tell you to buy that. Do you have somebody that you have to ask permission to go to the grocery store? Or maybe permission if you want to go out to lunch with a friend? And some women, to the point where they have to do favors. It's not only getting permission, but it's, okay, then you need to do this, this, and this. And some things aren't very pleasant, but that's the only way she's allowed out of the house. And I know for some of us it's easy to think, well, why would she allow that, My goodness, just stand up and say, no, I'm going to leave if I want to leave. It's a lot easier said than done. And that's called victim blaming. When we ask, why does she do that? Why does she stay? Why don't we ask, why does he do that? Why does he do that? Why does he think he needs to have the power and control? Why does he hurt her? Why does he hurt anybody that's less powerful than he is? We need to direct the attention away from the victims to the abusers and figure out how to stop this. And I'm happy to say that DVSAS is doing that in a very active, exciting way. First of all, we are focusing more and more on our prevention and outreach activities. You're going to see us in the community more and more. We're in the schools on all 3 islands. Very, very active, aggressive prevention work that we are doing. But also, in addition to that, we have a newly formed Men's Action Group that has started on this island. And actually, our next meeting is this Wednesday at the community college. And men and women are welcome to come. And I believe it starts at 5:30? Yeah, 5:30 at the community college. So please come, tell the men in your lives to come. It's a group by men for men, but right now they're still welcoming us women. So women, come while you still have the opportunity to give your input. They are going to be becoming more and more vocal in the community. And once they establish themselves and establish their parameters of what it is they're going to do and how they're going to do it, then they're going to replicate that on the other islands as well. So they are hoping to make a change and make a difference in the statistics in our islands. Any questions specific? I could ramble on and on. I love to talk about DVSAS, so yes.
How large an organization are you, Kim? How many employees or volunteers?
Well, we have 9 employees because we, of course, have all 3 offices staffed. We have only one on Lopez, one advocate on Lopez, and then the rest are divided between Orcas and San Juan. And we have quite a few volunteers. The number fluctuates. I would say we average around 10. We'd love to have more. We're actually starting a kind of a new volunteer coordinating program. We're having an advocate from each office join that team, so we will be kind of encouraging a stronger volunteer base. Yes?
What are some of the kinds of things that you're doing in the schools?
Well, we actually work with all age groups, excuse me, age appropriate interactive activities from Safe, Strong, and Free, which we do all the way down at Head Start in kindergarten. I have the right to be safe, strong, and free, these little actions, to the point where I used to do that when I was doing prevention before I'm in this position now. And to the point where I walk in there and they go, oh, you're the safe, strong, and free lady. And I'm like, yeah. So it's great. It means it's working. It means they remember. And they could tell you, what does it mean to be safe, strong, and free? What does that mean in your life? Identifying safe adults in their worlds, And by safe adults, we don't mean, okay, all these people are safe and all these people are unsafe. No, it's, who's my safe adult in my world? Is that my mom, my grandma, my teacher? Is it the police officer that I see on the street? Who is it? And if something happens to you, that's the adult that you should go to and ask for help or tell. Something makes me feel uncomfortable. And if that safe adult doesn't help, go talk to the next safe adult. And go talk to the next safe adult. Don't stop talking to your safe adults until somebody helps this stop, So that's in the younger groups, that's what we do. And then in the upper middle grade, or upper elementary, and then the middle school, We do respect, anti-bullying, cyber safety is a big thing that we're really moving into now, is the cyber safety. The sexting, we actually got a call from the grade school because third graders were sexting, and yeah, third graders. And so we were able to really kind of hit it with stop before you, or think before you click is the new little tagline that Melanie, who's our preventionist here now, was able to just get them to think before you click. And so they do fun interactive things like they have a garbage can and a little basketball hoop set up, and she brings a whole bunch of little slips of paper with things that would be something to think about, like I'm having a birthday party on Wednesday, or I think so-and-so is, showing their body parts to somebody else, which these types of things are being written by these children. And, so stop and think before you click. Is that something that you would post online or text in your phone, or is that something you should throw in the garbage? And so then they get it wadded up and either make a hoop or throw it in the garbage. So it's just fun little simple things, but it's things that's helping them to really process through that. So those are the types of things. And then in the older grades, of course, we're just kind of hitting it head on. Safe dating rules, safe relationships, is your relationship safe? And then the older kids, we even talk about things like safe party rules. We know you're not old enough to be drinking, but if you were to choose to do that, or at some point in your life when you choose to do that, these are the safe party rules, those types of things. And actually we're working with Ron right now on a post-island living class, is what we're calling it, for our juniors and seniors. Because our kids are so fortunate to grow up inside of this nice little bubble in our island communities, and yet in some ways that really disadvantages them to go onto a college campus all of a sudden, where there's everything there. And we've had, and actually I have two of my advocates did grow up in the islands, and now they've come back, and they have some stories to tell. One of them had a very near rape in her life because she said, I was just so naive. I just, it was, so she's helping to develop that curriculum, and we're able to go into the schools before the end of this year and share that with our juniors and seniors, and we're going to continue to do that every year, so it's something that they'll hear over and over. So, yes?
Are there instances of child abuse in the county that you've picked up on? I imagine it would be a little hard to figure that out, but...
Yes, there are. Yes, and again, the statistics run the same. There are. A lot of it goes unreported, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are. And, obviously we don't have one of the reasons we have this false sense of security is because we don't have kids being abducted off the swing set in the park by a stranger in the bushes kind of a thing. We don't have that type of fear in our islands. And so we seem to think we're immune to this type of issue, and yet we know that 95% of all children, nationwide, not just here, 95% know and trust their abuser. So the person who's sexually abusing that child is somebody that child already knows and somebody their parents already trust. So then we do education classes for parents. In fact, we're doing one on Lopez right now. It's called Where We Live. And that's kind of our pilot, and then we're going to take it from there and do it on the other islands. And it's an educational 4-week session for parents. And while the parents are in this room, the kids are in this room, and we're doing our prevention work with their age group as well. But teaching the parents how to recognize safe people. What are the signs of grooming? Because we know that somebody who's going to win your trust has got to groom you, got to groom your child to be able to abuse them. So, yes.
In the school system, when you go into the school, how do you reach all the kids? Is this something that or is it voluntary that certain kids can come to this? I just can't see how you go into the school and then gather a whole auditorium full of kids.
No, we go into the classrooms.
So the whole
Yes.
class is receiving the information together.
Yes. And we send out letters to the parents. Parents are alerted ahead of time, and especially for the younger kids, we have parent night, a night or two before we go in there, so that the parents are very aware of what we're going to talk about. And we give them follow-up information. This is what we're talking about. This is what your kids might come home talking about. These are the things, especially when it comes to cyber safety. 4th, 5th, 6th graders are pretty sharp, and some of them are even sharper than mom and dad. And so mom and dad are like, tell us, help. They don't know how to put the guard, the protections on the internet and the, all these different things. And Melanie is really good on that. So she's able to just kind of whip it out there and tell the parents, this is what you need to know to protect your child from the cyber danger that's out there, So yeah, we definitely give the parents the opportunity, and on occasion, parents have kept their child home that day or asked that the child is not in the classroom. They're not comfortable. So, and we don't teach, we teach safety. We don't teach moral types of issues, of course. We don't go there. So, did I see a hand in the back? Yes.
The Hispanic community on this island, like the rest of the community, has issues here.
Yes.
How do you deal with the immigration issue on that?
Well, we actually, it's another exciting thing about DVSAS is we have recently, within this last year, hired a Spanish-speaking advocate. In fact, she speaks 4 languages fluently, so she's very, very valuable. And she is building a bridge into the Latino population for us, a very wonderful bridge. And we are seeing more and more clients coming into our office now asking for services. Young adults as well. We have a really, really strong young adult support group, psychoeducational / support group going on right now. And we've had some Latino kids ask if they can join. And tonight is our last night, so we're taking a month off and then we're going to start a new one. So we're hoping to pull in some Latino kids to that. We don't really need to provide a Spanish-speaking one to them particularly, simply because, of course, they're about as fluent as we are, but the parents aren't as fluent. So to be able to reach them with UB, our Spanish-speaking advocate, has been a really great asset to us. As far as the immigration issues, we will work with anybody no matter their immigration status. And there are laws, state laws that protect them and federal laws that protect them. If they are a victim of domestic violence, if they report it and ask for help, they aren't going to be deported. So, and the sheriff can certainly speak more to that when we have had to work with a few issues where maybe the perpetrator, if it goes that far, could be deported, and that's a, case-by-case basis. So, yes?
What about reporting to law enforcement? I mean, when a client comes to you seeking assistance, and it's clear to you that the person has been abused, do you routinely go yourselves to law enforcement, or do you try to encourage the victim to go to law enforcement? What's your role there?
We never report to law enforcement. We have a client confidentiality policy that it's the client's option to report to law enforcement. Of course, if there is a child involved, anything, and we are mandated reporters, so anything that's a vulnerable adult or a child, of course, we have to report. But beyond that, we present that option to her. This is an option. You can go to the sheriff's department, if you want us to go with you, if you want us to be here when you make the call, that type of thing. But yeah, no, we would never make a report for her. And a lot of people have the misnomer that the victim is going to just reach out for professional services, and that's not the case. The majority of victims will reach out to what we call their natural helpers, and that's you guys. That's their friends, their family, their coworkers, the person they sit by at church, or the person that they attend a civic club with, whoever they have a safe relationship with, that's the person they're going to talk to. And so it's really, really important that you guys educate yourselves and you become aware of the resources around you. I mean, even if it's nothing more than, hey, I just heard about a place, DVSAS, they're here to help. I'll go with you if you want me to. I'll drive you there and sit in the car. I mean, we've had bosses call and say, I just realized that one of my, employees is being abused. What do I do? Help. How can I help her? Calling ahead of time. And so I'll walk him through, well, these are the things you say. This is offer to drive her here if she won't come by herself. And we've had actually 2 different times since I've been working here where bosses one came in with her and then he actually sat in the waiting room, but one sat in the car and waited for her because he wanted to make sure she got the services to be safe before she went home that night. So getting the word out into the community is going to be the best way to combat this. Anything else?
Yes, what have you found after a client comes to you? What are the statistics
do they remain, percentage remaining in that home? I mean, what does it look like after they walk through your door and you've provided services? What does that look like in terms of the woman who's been abused or her children? Of course, the children are not going to be protected by your responsibility to report, but what does that look like down the line?
Well, there's a national statistic that a woman will go back to either the current violent situation or another violent situation up to 7 times. So we say leaving isn't an event, it's a process. We help her get the tools, we help her build her toolbox so that maybe next time she'll have all the tools she needs to be able to leave. We talked about barriers earlier. There's a lot of barriers out there. And so if we can help her eliminate just a few of those barriers, then we can help her maybe not repeat the same type of relationship or in that same relationship if she chooses not to. I would say that the numbers, it's hard to say. I'd like to say, wow, 70%, don't ever go back, but I would say maybe we're pushing in on 50 perhaps that don't. Usually by the time that the woman comes to us, she's already at the point where, all right, this has got to stop, I need help, or whatever. And a lot of times they'll sit there and, I remember one young gal that just sat there and cried, and I don't know why I'm here, this is so hopeless, and she had tried to leave a year before. She's an example of one that just didn't have quite enough tools the year before. But then she came this next time because a friend urged her to come, and it was a pretty violent situation that had happened. And anyway, the end of that happy story is she has totally rebuilt her life and is free of that abuse and is going to school and is doing great things for herself. And, so she just had to have enough tools in her toolbox to be able to leave. Yes?
Excuse me. What are the roles that you have for volunteers? And do you have enough safe houses in the county?
So safe houses, what Joyce is referring to by safe houses, is we don't have a shelter in this county. We couldn't afford to keep a shelter open and running. It's just too cost prohibitive. So we have what's called safe homes, where actually private homes allow us to use a room in their home. And it's completely confidential to the point where even the sheriff's department does not know where those safe homes are. Only one staff member, besides me, knows where the safe homes are on each island, and for obvious reasons. And if it's ever exposed, which it was recently on Lopez, so now we're looking for a new safe home on Lopez, because the client told how wonderful it was in this home, and it's like, ah! So, of course, that endangers everybody, and so therefore now we're looking for a new one. We're always looking for safe homes. We actually, on this island right now, are pretty adequate, which is amazing. But again, it's always nice to have a backup, because again, if one gets exposed, or if somebody's off island, I like to have at least 2 options on each island. Right now I do have 2 here, but it's always nice to have some in my file in case I need another one. So, yes?
Another question. Approximately each month, how many women do you service?
Well,
Either self-reporting or a friend or...
it fluctuates.
Of course.
And it almost sometimes seems like goes with the moon, oh, it's a full moon or whatever it is, or christening right after the holidays, it seems to be more, that type of thing. I would say on average, on this island, probably around 10 to 12, 10 to 13, and that's separate women, and then obviously we see them multiple times, and that's in person, and we also have our crisis line. We get the crisis calls, just information, referral, lots of various things that we would be getting calls for.
Okay, I'd like to invite the next speaker, and then if we have more questions, we'll have more time for questions and answers at the end.
Thank you.
Hello. So I kind of like to think of Kim as the brains and the sheriff's office as the muscle, so to speak. One thing that she didn't allude to is that as soon as as soon as they call 911 and they report to the sheriff's office, it's not the first time they were struck, that they were abused, they were hit. It's usually well down the line to the point where, and I use she because it is the vast majority of them are women. She's had enough and she calls 911, or a neighbor hears it and calls 911. That's the biggest problem, and I'll talk a little bit about the problems and issues that we at the sheriff's office see. In that, imagine if you're, I know you can't imagine being abused unless it's happened to you, but imagine the woman is being abused, and if she calls 911, we're going to take her sole source of support away, not sole source of support, but we're going to take her support. A lot of times it's her financial support. It's the father of her children. It's the person that she thinks she loves. And we constantly are seeing it over and over and over again. We'll show up, and in the state of Washington, there's a mandatory arrest period. If there's a physical act took place, meaning somebody was struck, somebody was hit, we are mandated by state law to make an arrest within 4 hours. After that, it's our discretion, and we generally do anyways. But so we arrest that person. She knows we're going to arrest him because we've probably done it once or twice before, or it's happened to a previous relationship with her, so they hesitate to call to begin with. Then, when we show up, we take her husband away, and kids are there crying. She's upset, she'll fill out a statement, and then later on she'll retract the statement. She doesn't want to press charges. It doesn't go any further. He ends up back in the house. We really rely on DVSAS to work closely with us, because most of the time this is a crime that's perpetrated by the male on the female, and now we've got a male officer walking into the home. He's got a gun, got vest, big, imposing. We're making an arrest, we're taking somebody away, kids are crying. They don't want to speak with us. And then we leave. We take the husband, we leave her there alone. We now have a packet that we hand out to every domestic violence call we go on, giving them the option for us to turn their information over to DVSAS, so that when we leave the home, the victim, and I'll say victim because there are men, but the victim has an opportunity to reach out and contact somebody. And friends, I always tell them to contact DVSAS, because your friends are not always the best source of advice, so to speak. I mean, they're great for getting you out of the situation possibly, but you really kind of need somebody, I think, that's unbiased, can step away from the big picture, who doesn't remember him when he was really good to you, or, you know, whatever. So that's kind of our that's our issue. Just getting the female or the victim to contact us and report it. The Hispanic community. Somebody talked earlier about the Hispanic community. That's something that I've really been thinking a lot about lately. I was at last weekend before last. I was at a forum at the Grange, and that was brought up. I really start questioning even deporting the male to begin with, whether he's undocumented, simply because of every 10 domestic violence calls that we respond to, or every domestic violence call we respond to in the Hispanic community, it's probably happened 10, 20, 30 times before. It's a cultural issue. We're not just going to arrest the breadwinner and the father of the kids. We're going to arrest them, take them to the station, and ship them out of the country. So I think a lot of those calls are not being reported, simply because it's cultural, and they don't want the father of their kids or the person who's making most of the money, 50% of their income, to be just taken out of their lives, sometimes forever. So that's something that I've really been contemplating here recently while I agree some of these guys are bad people and should not be here, but if by us deporting one person prevents 10 people from reporting it, maybe that one person shouldn't be deported. Maybe we can reach out to that Hispanic community better. So that's kind of us in a nutshell from the sheriff's office. Like I said, we come in, we make the arrest, we work with DVSAS closely. And I am part of that men's action group, and I'm looking forward to it. I think that's great. We've got to stop, just working on the victim after the fact. We need to start working on the perpetrators before the fact. It's an education process. And I believe it's a learned behavior. It's kids in the family, they're learning it from their parents, growing up and doing it again. It's a cycle that needs to stop. And I think targeting the kids, targeting the young people early, definitely the way to go. So.
How frequently do arrests of domestic violence perpetrators lead to formal prosecution and conviction?
Not very often. Sometimes. Generally speaking, it's pled down to maybe an assault 4, which is, sometimes a slap on the wrist. Sometimes we had one here recently that I took care of 7 or 8 months ago, and she refused to cooperate in trial at all. And we built the case, had it all together, she made statements, and then it come down to trial, refused to cooperate. So now the prosecutor's in the point of, okay, do we proceed to trial with an uncooperative victim, which trying to convince a jury that she's a victim when she's sitting there clearly stating, I'm not the victim. It happens quite a bit, and from my experience, even if I make an arrest, there's a temporary no contact order put in place by the courts, and that's mandated by law. But once that's over, they're right back in the home again. And quite often they're violating the order anyway, so we arrest them on an order violation. But they're back in the home, they're back in contact. So, it's, like she said, it's tools. They need the tools, and quite often they just need that repetitiveness over and over and over again. So.
What proportion of calls did the sheriff's office get, would you say?
DV calls are the vast majority of our calls. I don't have a firm number. It's probably 65–70% of our calls involve domestic violence of one form or another. And I've got to say probably 99.9% of them involve alcohol or some intoxicating substance. So there's always alcohol involved. And it always seems to, I don't know why, it evolves around the holidays too. It's whether it's two brothers or a family getting together and the family starts fighting, I don't know what it is, but it seems like Christmas, Valentine's Day, oddly enough. They get together, they have a little too much to drink, and then an argument ensues, and then somebody gets hit or somebody gets smacked or beat, or and it's the worst calls for us to go into. They're the most dangerous calls we have to deal with, and the most heartbreaking calls. Especially when you're walking in and there's kids there, the kids are crying. It's not a good scene. So.
Ron, do the churches have any input on this at all? Do they console their victims? Do they report anything?
The churches, I've not ever had a report from a church. I think clergy, like anybody else, are mandated reporters if it's vulnerable adult children. But as far as if a spouse went and spoke to a pastor or a priest, you mean? Or?
Yeah, this Hispanic community is probably Catholic. And do they? You don't know?
No, unfortunately. Laura?
Years ago, when I was working as a school counselor in a community where a lot of the parents, and particularly the fathers, worked for a paper mill, and they went out on strike, we had a large number, an increase in our number of reports we had to make of the violence against children and then sometimes against the spouse. Is that what happens here in the winter when a lot of people's jobs have gone away, or is
it's possible, I guess, but I have not noticed that or drawn any kind of correlation to that at all. No.
Something just came to my mind when you mentioned the children in the home after arrest has been made and the mom is crying and the children is crying. Is there any follow-up, a connection with the schools or a family resource center so those children can receive some sort of support emotionally or
Well, I think
counseling?
Sandra will probably allude to that a little bit.
Okay.
She works with, from the victims, and Kim also to a point. From a law enforcement standpoint, no. It's really tough, especially when you're talking about kids who don't understand what's going on. And then a neighbor calls 911 or the spouse calls 911, we show up, we arrest dad, it's kind of a vicious cycle, and, you know, we want kids to trust us. You're talking about the safe, happy, and free, is that what it was? Safe, strong, and free, you know, go to a safe adult, it's supposed to be cops, but then you get kids who, well, I don't want to go talk to the cop because he arrested my dad. And, I mean, it's a traumatic experience when we take people out of the home, and we always try to get the kids either in another room, out of the house, have a family member take them while we're there talking to them. Sometimes it just doesn't happen because, you know, the mother is crying or upset, and she's got the kids clinging to her, the kids are crying. I mean, it's an ugly scene all the way around.
Because they've already witnessed whatever the violence was.
Yeah,
Now
and
you're
they didn't just
witnessing
witness it
their-
once, they've witnessed
Right.
it numerous times. This just happens to be the first time we're there.
It
And
seems
quite
that's
often,
a place that vulnerable group could be referred somewhere, or their needs could go
Well,
somewhere,
and-
that there could be follow-up either at school or somewhere. I understand, certainly you couldn't knock on the door when dad is
Yeah.
back and we're here to counsel your children. But,
yeah, well, I believe the schools are notified, I believe. No.
I mean, after arrest, that would be through the police department, is that there'd be some sort of communication with the school, public school system, because there are counselors
Yeah.
and
Yeah, we
school
can-
psychologists there.
That's something we'll discuss. So, you know, that's the other thing. Quite often, the kids are used against the mother too. You know, I mean, you don't call the police, they're gonna take me away, or, you know, that's why the wife doesn't want us taking the husband away. We've had the wives attacking us. She's the victim, we're arresting him, and now they're fighting with us because we're taking him away. Quite often, a lot of our calls are verbal, what we call verbal domestics. We get there, there's no signs of an assault, there's no signs of injury this time. Probably was in the past, if not, if it's our one and only time we've ever been there to a verbal domestic and we've never gone back, then it was probably one of those things where, okay, this is, yeah, somebody lost their temper, it happens and won't happen again. But if we've been to 2 or 3 verbal domestics, it's only a matter of time before we make an arrest, so. Joyce?
What kind of training do your officers receive, and specifically, do the dispatchers receive? I ask because I heard a very powerful commercial, and I think it was just before the Super Bowl came on.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if anybody else.
I think it's
heard
during
it.
the Super Bowl, if they're
Was
talking
it
about the same
during?
one, yeah.
I don't have
Yeah.
TV, so I had it on the radio, but it was a dispatcher, a woman calling and asking for pizza. And didn't everybody hear that?
Yeah.
And it was powerful, and I was so impressed that in the commercial, at least, the dispatcher picked up on it. Are you, and someone in the room with you? Because
Yeah.
she kept saying,
Yeah.
and pepperoni, but,
Yeah, yeah.
so I asked about the training.
Yeah, we just went through a domestic violence class about 6, 7 months ago now.
It was October.
Yeah, it was in October. Fantastic class. It was put on in conjunction with the Sheriff's Office and DVSAS. And Kim and I have talked about bringing them back out. That was kind of the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. I want to bring them back out and continue down that line of training. It was mainly for deputies only. It was more of a how to go in, de-escalate, how to deal with domestic violence. Talked a lot about the power and control wheel, which, you know, we all see it, but never really had it put to a graphic, so now, oh, it makes total sense. Dispatch is an area that I am working really hard to get more training for them. That they are really the first line. When somebody dials 911, they don't talk to a deputy, they don't talk to the sheriff, they don't talk to DVSAS, they talk to the dispatcher. From there, it gets disseminated down the line. So getting more training for dispatch is very high on my priority list. So as it stands right now, there has not been any training for them, but that is coming very soon. Tom?
Is there any correlation between drug use and domestic violence?
Alcohol use. I mean,
Alcohol.
I don't know that there's. I've not ever seen any. You're talking about like hard illicit drugs, methamphetamines, heroin, cocaine, stuff like that, or are you talking prescription or just drug use in general?
Yeah. Does it exacerbate the situation, or if they're doing marijuana, does it calm it down, or? or what?
I've not ever seen, I don't think I've ever been called into a house where they're doing heroin or cocaine or meth for a domestic.
Yeah, but alcohol,
It's-
yes.
Yeah, alcohol definitely,
Right,
absolutely.
okay.
Alcohol's the number one. Like I said, I struggle trying to think back over my last 9 years here, how many domestic violence calls I've been on where both people were totally sober. And I can't think of one single call I've ever been on where both people were just 100% sober.
Just a mechanical question. How many deputies do you have on each island all the time?
6 here. We've had 7 here. We had 5 on Orcas and 3 on Lopez. When I got elected, that dropped us down to 6. And Orcas Island, I joke, somebody put something in their water because they have just been run ragged over the last year. They need another officer. So I'm taking my position, putting it on Orcas to help them combat the number of calls they're getting. And it's not
When
this.
they call 911 or 911, where does it go? Does it go
Goes into
here,
the sheriff's
central,
office, yep.
and then the call goes to,
It goes out over the radio. We have, our dispatch center is in the sheriff's office, and then it
Yeah.
goes out over the radio to the cars, to the people in the
and
cars.
they can reach anywhere on the islands? If it's another island,
Yeah.
say Orcas on the other side of the mountains or whatever, that you can always be, your people can always be reached.
Yes. And sometimes we call them out. And Orcas lately we've been calling deputies out of the house more and more often, because a domestic violence call is a mandatory 2-officer call. And we don't always have 2 officers on.
Then what do you do?
We call someone out from their house, and they get dressed and get in their car and go. So, yeah, domestic violence calls are by nature the most dangerous call we deal with. You've got alcohol involved, you've got heightened emotions, elevated anger, just the number of people involved. Quite often you have weapons involved, and if you don't have weapons involved between the 2 of them, there generally are, well, there's always a weapon in the house, whether it's a knife, a baseball bat, a gun, whatever. There is always a weapon involved. So, and if you've arrested the person 2 or 3 times before, well, maybe this is the one time they say, I am not going to get arrested again. And they're going to fight till there's go tomorrow.
So if they call you, if you get a call, is it mandatory that you take someone in?
No.
That's not true.
No, only if an assault took place. If we show up and they're both, no, we just, he was screaming at me, I was screaming at him, it was over, he bounced a check or whatever. It doesn't matter what it's over. But if they're just screaming, yelling at each other, when we get there, we always implore one of them to leave, okay? One of you guys need to leave, because if you don't, and we come back, somebody will get arrested. We will take somebody in. So generally speaking, somebody always leaves until the emotions can calm down, cooler heads can prevail. But unless there's actually an assault that took place, that's the only time we're mandated to arrest somebody. We have no say over it.
How do you define assault?
Well, if there's like a mark, if somebody smacks someone, they got a red mark on their cheek, if they're bleeding.
It has to be physical?
Yeah.
Or is there just a threat will do?
A threat, if it's a verbal threat, that's not a mandatory arrest. But if they actually went to the point where threatened it and the person was in fear, actually in fear, then we will make the arrest.
Hands around the neck, is that considered?
That's an assault, definitely, absolutely. Absolutely.
Even if.
Doesn't matter. You put your hands around somebody's neck, whether you squeezed or not, the person who had their neck, had the hands around their neck was probably terrified that person's going to jail. Yeah. And that happens quite often. I don't know what it is about the neck, but guys just they get angry, they grab for the neck.
It works.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Anything else?
Okay, thank you. And we'll have
Thank you.
There's not a mic here, right? I'm not working with a mic, right? This isn't.
Right.
No, there's no mic. It's on the
Thanks.
bench. I see what you're saying.
I brought today some articles that were in the Sounder 2 years in a row during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Articles that one called Why Did You Stay? And the other one called She's Still There, from 2011 and 12. And then I also brought an article, in case any of you didn't see it, from last year about 2 young sexual assault victims and the victim blaming they experienced on Orcas Island last year. So I will leave these here. Thank you for bringing us and asking us to come. I'm the victim advocate for domestic violence and sexual assault in the prosecutor's office. Christine Miller is our general crimes advocate. She is my partner. I'm part-time, so Christine does a lot of domestic violence and sexual assault work when I'm not there. Basically, our job is different from DVSAS, and the moment a victim comes to us, we're clear that DVSAS provides completely confidential services. And I work in the prosecutor's office, and I work with the prosecutor and the sheriff's office to try and hold, to try to support them through the process that will hold perpetrators accountable and hopefully prevent further abuse from happening. So in some ways my role is more limited, my confidentiality is more limited, but I work with folks through the whole criminal justice process. And when I was thinking about what's most important to say today, Christine and I were talking and she said, you know, you've been in this field over 30 years, why don't you tell your story of your own experiences with domestic violence and sexual assault? And while I feel kind of shy doing that, as I thought about that, I realized that there really, it really sort of clarified and reconfirmed for me just how important this work is. And that is mostly what I most want to convey to you. So here's my story. I have never personally experienced sexual assault, nor did I have domestic violence in my immediate family growing up. My 2 best friends since I was 4 years old, who remain my friends today, experienced both sexual assault and domestic violence in their homes. My home was the safe place that they came to. My home was a working class home in the south side of Chicago. In my home there was a kind father and a very strong mother who continues to believe in and live the value of simple decency and respect for everyone. My parents did not identify as feminists. They were not activists, but they created one. I came to this field through a commitment to social justice while an undergraduate at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, with Lori Gallo, who sat on the Council for Women's Awareness with me. I was blown away by a constitutional law class there. In 1979, I shared a seat on a bus with Bella Abzug. How many of you know who that is? And we were going from Peoria to Springfield to lobby for the Equal Rights Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which we lost. We did not ratify, and our Constitution has never specifically and distinctly offered protections based on gender. At age 21, I went to the Peace Corps with my friend Joyce, who's knitting right there. And she's visiting from Boston today. And I said I would go to any country they would send me to as long as I could work for the empowerment of women. And the United States government sent me to Nepal, where I helped groups of women get microloans for goats and water buffalo. We on the south side of Chicago know a lot about this, so they were lucky to have me. Their men were away breaking stone into small gravel to build roads in Nepal, and the women were left to tend to their subsistence farms and their families on their own. I took those women by the hand, literally, and pulled them sometimes into the bank and into the agriculture office so that they could get loans for these goats in Buffalo, so that they could get medicine when they got liver fluke rather than losing the livestock because their husband wasn't there to get the medicine. I spoke infantile Nepali and knew nothing, obviously, of animal husbandry, but somehow they trusted me to walk through those doors. They got their livestock and improved their family's nutrition. More valuable to me personally, though, was learning alongside them under kerosene lamps in buffalo sheds at night to read and write their beautiful Sanskrit language. I watched those light bulbs go off as they sounded out the first word and the next. And by the third realized that this alien symbols were the key to unlimited knowledge, and they suddenly had access. When I returned to my village to visit 8 years later, my very literate friends showed me their bank statements. All of their loans had been repaid. They showed the offspring of those original goats in Buffalo and the slate roofs they'd purchased with the proceeds of milk and meat sold. Sturdy slate roofs which replaced leaking thatch. They showed me that their daughters were still in school beyond the first couple of years. Their health was better, their hopes were higher. I didn't go to Nepal to do domestic violence or sexual assault work, but I found it. A wealthy landowner impregnated a child servant and sent her back to her own village to be the disgrace of her poor family. A man with multiple wives beat and neglected his least favorite wife and children in favor of the others. The father of my host training family was called upon many times to keep the peace in neighbors' homes when men came home drunk and angry. These informal responses by other community leaders were more common than formal justice system responses there. But when the leader was the perpetrator, no response was common. After Peace Corps, I moved to the Washington, D.C. area. To join our new community, my husband volunteered in a batterers treatment program, and I volunteered in the rape crisis and domestic violence program. I got my master's degree in social work at night while working with the chronically mentally ill by day. And after getting my MSW and doing some work with refugees, I was hired as a sexual assault therapist in the program where I volunteered. Most of the women who had chronic mental illness had sexual assault experiences, and most of the girls and refugee women I worked with had sexual assault experiences. They and the women who I had the honor to work with in the rape crisis program taught me what it was like to be powerless at the hands of aggressive men. I also experienced with them the victim blaming perpetrated by families, friends, churches, communities, law enforcement officers, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and juries. Randy Gaylord brought me to Friday Harbor in 1998 to start the Victim Services Program in his office. Here, I not only have the honor of working with courageous survivors who speak up and go to the criminal justice system, I had the honor of working with Charlie Silverman. He is our ex-chief deputy prosecutor who retired last year, a very wise man who did not abuse the power of his office or of his gender. He offered to victims, time after time, an alternative to the misogyny our culture silently endorses and under which their abusers thrive. We were a team. To sit in a room with Charlie Silverman and a 16-year-old rape victim was to watch healing unfold. We have 5 new prosecutors since Charlie's retirement last year, but I miss the power of that triangle. An old Jewish man, as he called himself. An advocate who understands the misplaced shame that victims carry. and those tentative, wounded women, young and old, who have the courage to stand up to their abusers in a misogynist culture and demand the decency and respect that my mother taught me was their due. In the course of that process, I watched them shed the shame that didn't belong to them and give it back to perpetrators. We in the criminal justice system, and all of us in this community, have the power to reinforce that shame or to help them to shed it. Every response counts. I must say yes, as the others did, there are a few cases of female abusers that come to our work each year. And domestic violence and sexual assault are problems in the gay community as well. Both of these really deserve serious attention. But the bulk of our work is the same old story. Misogyny and gender stereotypes continue to yield aggressive men who want to control women and disempowered women. This is true around the world and in San Juan County in 2015. Because our island communities are so small and I don't want to disclose private information, I'm going to tell a few stories from my work back in DC and compare them to the norm in our system here. I'll start with the case that is both the most horrific and the most inspiring of my career. A member of the Hutu tribe in Rwanda was asleep in her village when raided by Tutsi guerrillas. They killed every man, captured the boys, and raped the girls and women. My client remembers being raped by several men after seeing her husband killed and before going unconscious. She saw them raping her daughters and aging mother-in-law. She woke in a small plane where she was being cared for by a Danish nurse. After receiving medical care in Denmark, she was flown to New York with a letter explaining her circumstances to present to U.S. Immigration. She was assigned to Lutheran Social Services in Arlington, Virginia, where she was set up in an apartment with 3 Tutsi roommates. Her social worker referred her to me, and I met with her and a French interpreter. She did not know if any of her 6 children had survived, and if so, where in the world they might be. She shared horror stories, this Hutu woman, with her Tutsi roommates, and they supported each other in their new country. I traveled to Nepal to adopt my daughter in the middle of my work with her. And I brought my baby to her 50th birthday party in the home of her social worker and her family and the French interpreter and her family. As this woman snuggled and loved my new baby, still not knowing if any of her own had survived, I am still without words to convey my tender inspiration to witness the power of the human spirit to heal. After I moved to Friday Harbor, I received one letter from her written amazingly in English after 2 years here, saying she had learned that her mother-in-law and 2 children had died in the attack, but at least 2 children survived, one in Kenya and one in Rwanda. She was returning against the advice of U.S. authorities, who were concerned for her safety, of course, to reunite with them. In the D.C. area, there was obviously more racial diversity than here, and therefore racial inequities more apparent. I testified in a case where a Spanish-speaking child of 9 was abused by her mother's Caucasian boyfriend. Despite overwhelmingly strong evidence, he was acquitted. During my 13 years there, every sexual assault case that went to trial with a minority victim ended in acquittal. Every case in which a white woman was assaulted by a minority ended in conviction. After these kinds of records, one really wonders about the value jury pools place on people of color still in our world. In San Juan County, We've already addressed the piece about our Spanish speakers. If a call is absolutely going to result in deportation, that prohibits calls from taking place. And really responding to those on a case-by-case basis, I think, is so important. And I'm really grateful, Ron, to be in a dialogue with you about that. In the DC area, there was obviously, oops, I said that already, back east, there was a remarkable difference in attitude, very fascinating, between the adult sex crime investigators and the child investigators. Adult rape victims were not only routinely polygraphed by investigators, but in incredibly insensitive and intimidating ways. I fought to stop that practice with individual investigators and with the police department administration for 13 years. And the agency that I worked for continued to do that after I came here. As far as I know, no victims of domestic violence or sexual assault have ever been polygraphed in Sangamon County. Thank you, Sheriff. Keep it up. Don't ever do that, please.
It makes sense.
Our funding, our federal violence against women funding now prohibits law enforcement folks who get their funding to polygraph victims, so I'm grateful for that. Female adult sex crime investigators, when the cop was a woman, they were so harsh, beyond the men, so victim blaming. And it seemed that the culture of the police department demanded that of them, that they weren't taken seriously unless they were tougher than the guys on the victims. Here, our only female deputy, Nikki Rogers, consistently, in my experience, goes above and beyond to do thorough investigations, to do follow-up, to provide support to victims, and I hope that the Sheriff's Office will give her kudos as much as possible. Back east, the child sex abuse investigators at both CPS, Child Protective Services, and the police department were wonderful professionals, exquisitely skilled in working with children and families, very committed to them, committed to a really highly functioning multidisciplinary team among all of us in the community working on those cases, and most of them spent most of their careers in that child sex abuse, those sex abuse units. Very different than the adult investigators who were kind of, it was a stepping stone on their ladder to homicide. In San Juan County, when a child sex abuse victim is under 10 years old, we contract with some very top-notch forensic interviewers on the mainland. But they're on the mainland. If you want to do a quick follow-up, that's not possible. We haven't had a local CPS worker who lived and was assigned to these islands since when, Joyce? 8 years? 5 years? I don't know, too long.
And we don't have one now.
We do not.
There's a new one being appointed, but she's not.
She's not going to live here.
No, she's not going to live here.
She's not going to live here.
No, and until a year and a half ago, our Child Protective Services worker worked out of his car. And
His office was in Oak Harbor and he would come as needed. But obviously, this makes the system fractured and cumbersome and much less effective. So my biggest dream is to have a CPS worker here. We have an incredible, Ron has hired an amazing new detective, Steve Parker, and he is certified as a child forensic interviewer back in Montana. And hopefully he'll get that here and we'll be able to have him do some of those for us here.
He's like Michelangelo. The guy's amazing.
It's been so delightful to have him work in these cases. So, our domestic violence perpetrator treatment program, this is the bad news. I'm sorry, people, there's a lot of bad news. Our perpetrator treatment. So we have these women who want their husbands to get help. Our perpetrator treatment program closed, I think, 3 years ago, Brad? Has it been? Right now, Compass Health is piloting a dialectical behavioral therapy group that targets perpetrators. It's kind of in the works, being developed as the guy who's trained to do this is preparing for retirement. The corporate offices of Compass Mental Health are not particularly interested, I'll just say, in community needs if the bottom line of financial security is not absolute. So I feel like this fledgling new pilot program is really quite tentative right now as well. So, I guess my wish list sort of has equally up there on the top for Steve Parker to do child forensic interviews, for us to have a local CPS worker, which is not in the works at DSHS, and for us to get some commitment from Compass Health to really take on our need for perpetrator treatment here for domestic violence. I also have a private, Nisha mentioned that I also have a private psychotherapy practice here. And I have to say, my work there every day still, in every couple session or every individual session with men or women, with children, I am battling gender roles that limit people. They limit our kids, they limit our marriages in healthy, strong, functioning families. They limit our families. They are the root of domestic violence and sexual assault, and it is so ever present. In 2010, my friend Suzanne Olson from Orcas and I wrote a grant to the Orcas Island Community Foundation, and the LGBT fund of the Community Foundation funded us to do a sexuality education program that is created by the Unitarian Universalist Church. It's called OWL, Our Whole Lives. It's very comprehensive, 28 sessions, 90 minutes each, though the kids beg for more, so we make it 2 hours each. And each class, this go around, this is the second time we did the full curriculum on Orcas. It is inescapable the way that gender roles hurt us, or gender expectations that don't fit who we are. So in this class, we have an opportunity for 5 boys, 5 girls, middle schoolers, to talk to each other as equals, to be challenged to shed those stereotypes of what it means to be masculine or feminine, and therefore I'm supposed to be this way, to really looking at their own values, their own desires and their own boundaries, and how to verbalize them to each other, boys and girls together. This is my greatest hope. This brings me incredible joy. And this is how we have to do it. DVSAS's efforts to do prevention in the schools is absolutely should be at the top of your list of who to support. It's really the only way to make a difference with domestic violence and sexual assault. I know it's not very popular in 2015 to say the words misogyny or feminism, but these things fuel me today at age 55 as much as they did when I was 19 years old and trying to get the ERA passed in Illinois. If any of you are doubters that misogyny is at play, I want you to read the Sounder story about these girls on Orcas and the way that they were shamed in our community. Misogynistic victim blaming still occurs all over the world, in our community. In the criminal justice system, sometimes I fall prey to it when a victim totally recants her story or outright lies or says that I made it up. I often think, what would Charlie say? And I have many great partners in the prosecutor's office, the sheriff's office at DVSAS, and Brad Fincher, our probation officer, and many others in this community who call upon every one of us for our wiser selves to step up, remember the big picture, and do better. The training that DVSAS brought to the sheriff's office and to all of the advocates in the island and to the prosecutors, it was stunningly outstanding. And Ron has the good fortune of coming on board just with all of that fresh in our mind and a commitment to do more of that. And we will do better. Thank you so much.
Good job.
Yes.
Why is it that today people fall away or are afraid to use the word misogynist?
Oh, you know, I think women have made so many strides, and we want to believe that we're not stuck there anymore, but we are. And so I think that it's not popular. It's looked upon as a problem, but it is the root of, it is feminism that brought us here. It is feminism that have brought so many women to seek help and to stop misogynistic homes and experiences. And it's still needed. We're not done. We're so not done. Yes.
Tell me, please, that universal misogyny is not genetic, that it's cultural, passed down. Can you tell me that?
You know, these New Agers that live in these islands, they're always talking about back in the matriarch days or whatever. Surely it's not, right? What matters is that we keep at it. What matters is that we challenge it when we see it. When we see a baby girl, we say, look how strong you are, instead of what a pretty dress. In so many little ways we contribute. We do it over and over and over. That girls are pretty and need to be taken care of. That boys are strong and need to be directive and figure out what you're going to do in this life. And we think we're not doing it, but we're doing it all the time. I'm doing it all the time, and I'm so not wanting to do it all the time.
But it's not genetic.
No.
That's what I want to hear.
No, I will be authority. No, it's not genetic. Yes.
I just got something saying it is genetic. There is a gene. So I can
That
forward
says what?
that to you. That domestic violence can be passed down. So
Oh,
I'll
of
send you that
course,
study.
of course.
And it's not modeling, it's genetic. It's not cultural modeling.
So of course, there are factors that go into everything, right? Multiple factors. There are children born out of homes where there isn't a hope in hell, we think, that that kid's going to make it. And they do, right? So genetic doesn't explain anything entirely. Culture doesn't explain anything entirely. But we do have the power to influence the cultural response that doesn't reinforce whatever genetic markers we're learning are associated with whatever. Yeah.
I think I guess I wonder what we can do though to, I'm hearing Tom say, tell me it's not because I'm male. And I think that there has to be something done for a huge number of men. I won't say it's the majority, just the huge number of men who are very sensitive to women, who don't participate in this kind of behavior.
So they need to be in the men's action group, right?
And I think you have to reach out to those men and say, you can be, you're good, you have things to offer people who need help or whatever, but we have to treat all men, not just this one little group of men one group of men, I'm not saying how big or little, but the group of men who are abusers. There are a lot of men who are not. And there comes a shame with being a man. And then you're lumped in this category. being a man, and then you're probably one of them, you know, the abusers. So I think you have to make in your statements in this group that you're working with or creating, that there are plenty of good men too, and they don't have to carry the shame of the men who are abusers.
That is one of the base premises that has started this group, is the good men, so to speak, standing up and saying it's not just a women's issue. We've always called this a women's issue. It's not a women's issue, you know, any more than it's a man's issue. And men, and there's a lot of good men, and they're getting a bad rap by the few, quote, bad guys that are perpetrating the violence. And so those good men are standing up and saying enough's enough. Enough's enough that we're getting a bad rap. Enough's enough that you guys are getting away with it, and that you're teaching generations, you know, because we've talked about the cycle. You know, we're going to help mentor the guys into, the young guys, into respect. And, you know, so, I mean, they're just in their little, the birthplace of this group. And this Wednesday, they're going to kind of be laying some groundwork. So again, if you know men that you think want to make a difference, encourage them to come to the community college at 5:30. And they can have a good, strong voice in exactly what shape this group is going to take. But that was one of the beginning premises.
Well, and you know, the vast majority of men are good men.
Yes,
You know,
they are.
it's not 50-50, it's like 99-1%, but it's always that 1% that really stands out, and they commit all those crimes over and over and over again. I mean, think of all the men you know in your lives. How many of them are rude to their spouses, to you, to their friends? I mean, you can tell that type of person just by the way they treat their friends. You know, they're not just abusers to their spouses, they're abusive to their children, they're abusive to law enforcement, to other people. You know, the vast majority of men are good men. It's just the ones that aren't really stick out.
You know what? Abusers are good men. Abusers have qualities that draw partners to absolutely love them and want to make families with them. And they keep having those good qualities when they're not abusive. So there isn't a black and white, you know, men are genetically bad. You know, there are factors of learned behavior. We don't know fully what the genetic pieces are, but there is a culture where it is acceptable in many ways. And I'm talking about in my private practice with healthy families where men to think they can control their life, that they're entitled to do that. This is what I'm talking about, when I say misogyny, you know, that we're different and men are entitled in a way. And they're good men, they're good people, they're not abusers. But it is a cultural norm that still hasn't been broken down. Laurie?
This is a question for each one of you, and in some ways you already answered it, but I want to ask it quite specifically. In each of your roles, it seems like you are trying to figure out how to build the sense that this is not acceptable in our community. And Ron, I think this is from you is the strongest sense that I've gotten in all the years that I've lived here, coming from law enforcement. What can we do as members of the community to reinforce your work in helping people understand, or in having us be able to say, these islands, it's not okay to do that in these islands?
Well, there's what we call the engaged bystander, where the more the bystanders, you folks, step in at the very beginning of the continuums, you know, at the disrespect, at the crude jokes, at the, you know, the crude remarks. I mean, I'll give you an example on the ferry. I'm on the ferry almost as much as I'm in my office these days. And on the Inter-Island Ferry, a while back, a young gal was on her way from one island to the other to go to school, and she walked past a table of men who ride the ferry every day to work on another island, and these adult men made a very crude comment about this young gal, this little teenage gal, the way she was dressed. And her friend that was with her stopped and said, "That's not okay. You don't have a right to talk to her that way." Good for her, right? Yeah, it makes you just feel like, yeah, go girl. Well, those guys said some smart comments back to her, you know, well, if she had dressed like that, and I don't know, they made some other smart comments, like thinking they were entitled, because the way she dressed, I have the right to talk to her, you know, talk to her this way. So this little gal teared up and ran to the bathroom, you know, and was all upset about these guys doing this. And anyway, but she was engaged and she was empowered, and I actually went and I came into the bathroom and saw her crying there, and so kind of dialogued with her, and I said, "Would you like me to go with you and go back to these guys?" "No, I don't want to go back and talk to them," you know, kind of a thing. But she felt, you know, we processed it, and then I saw her on the ferry the next couple days, and we continued to process it, and she felt empowered, she felt stronger, and actually she told her mom about it, because her mom came to my office, and, you know, and said, "I'm really glad you talked to my daughter." And I mean, these are things that we need to continue to teach from a young age, that we have to become engaged, and everybody here could make a difference, just in small, simple ways, and we could change the culture here. And I really think we could, and I know I say this on most every presentation I go to here, I think we have a really amazing opportunity in our island cultures to really make a change. We're kind of in this little microcosms here, you know, we could. And I would love to see our statistics lower than anywhere else in the United States, and it could happen if we all came together as a community and said, no, not on our islands. So.
We have the highest voter registration, or voter turnout, right?
Thanks to League of Women Voters.
We can do anything.
I was just thinking of how one reframes the discussion, and it's not so much about being men entitled to power, it's men and women entitled to power, in the same way we opened up the franchise, allowing women to vote. And we are still working on equal pay for equal work. So if we think about women exercising power in their everyday lives, their family, their business, that may open the dialogue.
You know, I have a soft spot in my heart for kids, and, you know, having 3 teenage girls in school here now. I go kind of, I guess, back to the root of the cause of respect. Treat everybody with respect. I treat everybody with respect, and I expect to be treated with respect. And I think if you know, in my mind, if kids respect each other, if they respect adults, if they respect the teachers, if they respect the community leaders, and respect themselves, then they're going to treat other people with respect. And there's not one single abusive partner on this planet that respects the person they're abusing. It just doesn't happen. So that's kind of that's kind of my focus, I guess, is, you know, I constantly talk about respect to my employees, to my co-workers, to my kids' friends, and even just people I see in town. You know? Treat each other with respect and dignity. That's my thing. You know, the fact is, we've probably, well, I guarantee you, have all either known somebody or spoken to somebody in a grocery store or at the line at the fair who's been abused, but you just didn't know it because you can't tell. They don't just wear a sign that says, I'm an abused or a battered woman or a battered person. You know, it's embarrassing. They won't tell people about it. They hide it. They wear makeup, they wear glasses, whatever. So, you know, you're not going to get to them from that aspect, but I'm a firm believer in you hit them when they're young and prevent that from ever taking place to begin with. So, but yeah, I am 100% on board. It's not acceptable behavior. I'm not a feminist, I'm a humanist. Whether you're treating another guy that way, another woman that way, or, you know, 2 guys treating each other that way, 2 women treating each other that way, it doesn't matter. Treat everybody with respect. That's my thing.
Has there ever been a non-misogynist culture that we could use as a model? Has that ever happened somewhere?
Good question.
Lori?
Not even where we were in the Peace Corps. I
That's it,
was
probably
in a
not.
matriarchal culture, it still wasn't true there. Yeah.
Right, in the matriarchal culture that you were living in, it wasn't true.
Which culture was that?
An island in the Pacific, Palau,
Oh.
part of what the US calls Micronesia.
Mhm.
Because they'd already been influenced by lots of other cultures, just like all of us are.
In certain areas, way up in the mountains in Nepal, women had way more power than they did in the middle hills or the lower sections of Nepal. And there was a sexual freedom that they had that was different, and there was, I think that there were less men for some reason. I don't know where the men went, but it seemed that there were,
They ran all the abusive ones off.
I don't know how it worked exactly. So
That's a
you know.
Vote them off the island.
I just wanted to comment that it's not really a model to have fewer men, because, no, again, because of, again, the way different cultures are, the fact, when I was in Tajikistan, it was a place with missing men because a large percentage of the population, like 30 or 40% of the population, had gone to Russia as guest workers, basically. And so there were many more women than men in the Tajik villages, especially. And it wasn't a happy situation for the women. They were reinstituting, they were marrying girls off at 13 because there weren't enough men, so you wanted to get them married as soon as possible. They were doing polygamy, which had been gone from that culture during the entire Soviet time, was coming back. So, simple solutions have strange consequences.
I think you're right that respect, like my mom taught me, is the bottom line. And calling non-respectful behavior that. And everybody, all of us thinking, challenging our own thinking to what's acceptable in terms of control within relationships. And working towards that kind of respect for all of us, for our kids, for all of us. Back in DC, I did I would every now and then do public, prevention work, and I was working with some middle schoolers there, and just describing, so there's a group of friends, and you're at the movie theater, and a boy is next to you, and he's touching you too much. What do? And this is still only 1997 or something, and the girls are saying, well, I would just stay really stiff, and hope he gets the message. It's like, oh, really? That's the best we can do? Move your hand. Don't touch me like that. Why can't our girls say that? Why aren't we teaching them that we get to say what our boundaries are, that we get to say, would you hold my hand? Instead of someone thinking they can do that without saying, can I hold your hand? Duh.
Kim?
Yes.
You mentioned just briefly that there are volunteers at DVSAS. Any specific volunteer roles you're thinking of for people who are really experienced in their own fields and want to come help DVSAS?
It definitely depends on what level of volunteering you're interested in. I mean, we definitely need just the basic office help, all the way from cleaning the office to, helping with paperwork and such as, things like that. And helping at events, of course, is a huge area where we always need volunteers. In fact, we've had to cancel one of our fundraisers that we usually have here every year because we just haven't had the volunteer pool to help pull it off this year, unfortunately.
Board members?
But definitely board members, yes. You are welcome to speak to Lori or Nisha about that if you're interested. And then if you're interested in direct client service work, you are required to obviously go through a pretty in-depth training. and, 42 hours of state certified training. And then some extra training in the office beyond that, and you could work our 24-hour crisis line. And if you were interested in becoming more than the crisis line and actually working face-to-face with the client, we can talk one-on-one about it if you like.
Not more than that, come see me, I'll give you a badge.
Yes.
I did the training in 2007, it was 30 hours. It was terrific, and I haven't used it. But I remember Patty asking for extra soap and household products and things like that, so that families who are starting again can start, no matter what. So are you still collecting that?
Oh, yeah,
And
we
could-
have it covered in our office. Each of our offices on each island, we have a place that we store personal items, personal hygiene items and soap. And, not a lot of laundry soap, obviously, we don't have a lot of space, but small things like that. And we have groups that make quilts, so we always usually have a little supply of blankets and such.
Yeah. Right now, I have an adult client on Orcas who was abused as a child, and I sent her to DVSS for more support in addition to her work with me, and she left the DVSS office, so this is a woman in her late 20s, left the DVSS office with one of those quilts. And after we do some specific difficult work, she goes home and she gets her DVSS quilt, and she gets some chocolate, and she takes really good care of herself.
Good
So
for her.
it's so sweet, So the agency that I started as a volunteer was what Kim is, just like DVSAS, and started on the hotline and then did a support group for sexual assault survivors, and then became a therapist there, and it's so valuable, and I'm so excited about a men's group here because it's huge. The impact of that can be immense.
So I'm just wondering, you talked about canceling your fundraiser, is that the April 19th
Fashion show?
fashion show? Oh, it's been canceled?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So are we. Very sorry. Yeah. We actually are having one on Orcas. We're going to actually be pulling it off in May because we have a pretty good volunteer pool there right now. So we're rebuilding our volunteer pool here.
Yeah.
So.
The thing that most excites me is for all these years of living here, the three of you are working more closely together, like three of you, from three different separate organizations that have so much overlap. You guys are overlapping. So I know you feel like it's a big thing that you're facing, but oh my gosh, I've never felt better that there's,
Oh yeah, there's definitely power in collaboration. Yes.
Can you say a little bit about what support groups are available on the islands? You've mentioned them peripherally a little bit, but maybe.
Well, right now, we have the Young Adults Healthy Relationships Support Group that's going on. Young adults being from the group that we have currently right now, I believe it's 18 to 23. Tonight is the last night of that one, and then we'll be starting again in a month. If you know of anybody in that age group that's interested, have them call our office and see if there's a space, because we are limiting it. I think we're trying to keep it 10 or 12 max in that group. If there's enough interest, we'd love to start a Latino one, a Spanish-speaking one, if we can find enough interest in that one. We're going to be starting, for the Latino population, we're going to be starting some simple classes, and again, we're doing it as classes rather than a support group, but it's a women's empowerment groups. We're going to be doing financial management, and we're actually going to be doing a cooking one too, cooking on a budget, healthy cooking on a cheap budget, or whatever she's entitling that one. Just so we can bring women through the doors, get them comfortable in coming. The spouses are okay because, oh well, or the partners are okay because, oh well, it's just a cooking class, or it's just a parenting class, or it's just a financial class kind of thing. But we're empowering her and giving her skills and tools that she needs. So those are the ones that are happening here. We're going to be starting a young adult one on both Lopez and Orcas as well. We would like to start a sexual assault survivor support group. Those are really tough to get going, obviously because of the confidentiality and everybody knows everybody kind of issues on these islands, but we're working on trying to put together one of those. And we also are looking into starting one for parents of children survivors, children who are sexual assault victims, and we would like to work with a non-offending parent and start a group for that. Yes?
One super problem, but I don't think we can address, is religion. Because I can't think of a religion that does not preach the superiority of men over women. They all do, with possible exception of Buddhism.
Quakers.
Well,
Unitarians.
you know, I think it's on a case-by-case basis. I mean, I have done presentations in faith communities, and some faith communities are much more open to it than others, and much more on the equality and the respect is kind of the base.
You've got to look at the basic texts of the Bible or the Quran or the Torah, and it's all there, the superiority of men over women.
I think, and I think it's on a case-by-case of how they interpret it. The whole submit, the submit text that is used against women a lot. And I've worked with faith leaders that actually will speak kind of in a holistic way with that verse. And it's in the, I guess, the Greek or Hebrew or whatever the original language is. They go back to the original and speak how that submit is, and then the flip side of what's expected of the man in that give and take relationship. So that is definitely a challenge, and it can be used against a woman, but it can also be used as her strength. And that's one thing we always check with a woman when she comes in. Does she have a faith? Is she based in any type of faith? And we're going to respect whatever faith she chooses as, because that's a lot of her support line right there. And we're certainly not going to say, well, there's one of your problems, you need to get out of your faith. And then, no, we're going to help her work within that and help it become one of her strengths and not one of her, the tools used against her, because it can be very powerful. Yes?
Actually, two quick questions. One, you talked about the lack of a perpetrator program, and are there any alternatives besides Compass Health for possible venues or something like that?
So the state certifies a specific model, the Duluth model, which is happening on the mainland, and judges can order perpetrators to go to the mainland for that treatment, but we all know what that means. To go to a weekly meeting in Mount Vernon or Bellingham or Seattle is, an expensive prospect for families, and judges are really reluctant to order it. There's questions about the, effectiveness of that model. There's been a lot of research, and none of it really strongly says, yes, this keeps men from perpetrating again. Men who are pro-social, who have jobs and families and a role in the community and that sort of thing, tend to do better than men who don't have those things and are, sort of have long rap sheets of many other crimes that they've committed. Antisocial sort of people, but, is that the model that we need to be ordering? So I have to give a lot of credit to Brad Fincher, who has really, our probation officer, who's really pushed to have something for these families, because these women want their men to get better. They don't want a divorce. They want them to stop the abuse. They married them because they love them. We live in a world where it's a wonderful thing to have a life partner, to have a family. They want the abuse to stop. And for us to not offer anything to these men is not helping anyone in our community. So I have great gratitude to the folks at Compass who are trying to pull this together, but it's not really strong. I don't know, Brad, maybe you could say something about where we are.
I think we're doing the best we can. Actually, no, I think we can always do better. But in that type of model, Compass Health is what we have. And so we're making the best of the situation with what we have in our small, isolated community. I would agree with you when you say that Compass Health as an organization has a model that they follow, and it has to be cost efficient, and if this isn't cost efficient, it's not going to be around very long. So we're always open to ideas that would be beneficial and might work. Always open to ideas.
The hard part is, you know, you take a woman who's been beat over and over and over again, she eventually is going to say, I've had enough, I'm not going to take any more beatings, I'm done. But you never hear a guy say, God, I've beat one too many women, I'm not beating anybody anymore, I can't beat anybody else. It just doesn't happen, it's tough to treat. I mean, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
What I will say, and what the sheriff said earlier, is the majority of these incidences involve alcohol or drugs. And so we do have a model, and we can treat substance abuse issues. And if that's a good portion of it, if we can get that part of it eliminated or out of the way, and with a domestic violence conviction, the court can retain jurisdiction for up to 5 years. So after the fact, if they're accountable to a court for 5 years, we do have an opportunity to monitor these people if they're not allowed to consume alcohol. We can do a fairly good job of that, at least doing the best we can to keep these people sober for a period of time. And if you have a sober person, then you can start to work on life skills and better skills for a good majority of them.
Absolutely, and luckily, we do have some chemical dependency treatment that is working. I want to be really clear that there are two separate problems. If someone has a substance abuse problem, curing that is not absolutely going to take away the violence problem. I often ask people, how many drinks do you need to hit someone? If it takes 4, then you have 2 problems. You have an aggression problem and you have an alcohol problem. If you say, I don't ever hit anyone, no matter what I'm taking, then yes, let's work on your addiction problem. And that's the problem that you have. But they are 2 separate problems and need to be addressed both. Joyce?
If the money is found for the DBT group, is there someone that can work with perpetrators trained to do that and already here?
Right now, Michael Baird and Steve Gresham are doing that group, and they both have some of the training in perpetrator treatment and are working with us to try and adapt the DBT group model to be more responsive and holding men more accountable. But how long they're both going to be there is unclear. This house is for sale. So it all depends on the housing market at the moment, whether or not we have perpetrator treatment.
Steve's house is for sale?
I think so.
And this is a leading question because I know the answer, but I don't think everybody else does. You talked a lot about the prevention that DBSAS is doing. Can you talk about how prevention is funded as opposed to victim services?
The majority of our grants that we get, our state grant funding, is for direct client services. There is a very small percentage, and by small I mean last year we got about $8,000 total for all 3 islands, which is really nothing. So the majority of the funding for prevention comes from private grants and private donations. It's people that believe in it and want to see it happen and are willing to open their wallets to make it happen, so. Yep.
We're taxpayer funded, so.
Well, we have historically always been completely grant funded through the Stop Violence Against Women money and victims of violence, or the victim witness grants through the state. And this year is the first time, because those monies have dwindled over time. It's the first year that Randy got our county council to back up and keep Christine and I at our current levels of half-time for me and full-time for Christine. So
That's county, you said?
county council, yeah, it's out of the county budget.
Okay.
I will say that in my office also, we have a domestic violence grant and we have a sex offender registration grant. So a fee they pay us to check up on sex offenders and stuff. That a lot of that funding goes towards domestic violence, sexual assault. So. Well, if it's a domestic violence fund, it has to go towards it. But I take money from our sex offender fund and also put it into domestic violence, sexual assault as well.
Didn't we just vote in an increase for law enforcement? Does any of that money go towards prevention or towards victim services or towards DVSAS work?
Christine?
I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of.
Theoretically, it will, maybe.
Well, this is the mental health?
No.
No, the law
No,
enforcement.
the justice.
Tax increase.
Oh, the tax increase.
Supposed to come to
1%.
us.
I think it's funding a little bit of victim services along with our grants. So maybe it's funding 20%.
So that's where the money, when Randy asked for money from the county, that's where it's coming from.
Yes.
She's our money person.
I was sort of gone, so I apologize.
Well, mental health tax money is out there too. I think there's some conversations.
We've got Barbara in on the conversations, right, Brad?
I think since Obamacare, AppleCare, there's some, it's having an impact on that mental health money because it's not maybe being used because people are getting services through AppleCare.
No, you're talking.
Yes and no?
Yeah, you're talking CWP, Community Wellness Program dollars, and as people have insurance, more people have insurance, they might have access to mental health care. But many people who now have insurance have very high deductibles.
Yes,
and
yes,
are
yes.
considered underinsured.
Yes.
So I don't think you're seeing a drop in the use of the Community Wellness Program money. I haven't heard that that's the case. I think what's happened is more people are eligible for mental health services at Compass.
Yeah.
And so their client numbers are up
Yes.
for that. So more people are maybe getting mental health services, but yeah, it's not freeing up
Is that
the mental health tax money as it, in the ways that it's being used right now.
Thank you, Nisha, for bringing these wonderful, Kim, Ron, Sarah, is that?
Sandy.
Sandy.